We're going to briefly talk about globalization and the pressures that come with it, and then there'll be other videos that you'll watch beyond this video that will go into it in a little bit more depth, as well as a reading that you're going to look at. So first of all, wanted to make sure you have a very crystal clear definition of globalization. It's the economic, political, cultural, and social transformations occurring throughout the world. It is a worldwide phenomenon. Okay, there are some characteristics. Basically, they come down to four main things: interdependence of various countries and people, the idea that we're all connected, the migration of large numbers of people, the growth of the internet and technology, and the spread of ideas and established connections among cultures that did not exist before. So basically, it's a bunch of different cultures that are integrated and interdependent on one another. We want to talk about some of the positives that have happened in the last 40 years when we've kind of really entered this globalization era. We're obviously still living in it. Your entire life will be spent continuing in this era, but this is what we've seen so far. For middle and developing countries on income level, there's been some really, really positive gains from globalization. The percentage of people living in extreme poverty is in the early 1970s was roughly globally about 44%. This in the late 2000s, and this has continued trend-wise, is now in the high teens, 17, 18%. So it's been reduced by over half. Also, in these same countries, the ability of children to live beyond the age of 5 has increased dramatically. So the mortality rate of children before 5 in developing and middle income countries was at 22% in the 1970s, meaning 22% did not make it past their 5th birthday. That number is now in single digits, down to about 5%. So this goes with the ability of people to not live in extreme poverty and then the survival rates of children. That has been some of the two of many very positive developments in globalization. Globalization also has some negative effects, and some of them have impacted the United States specifically. So one of the things the United States has seen in the global period is that we used to be a country that provided most of the world's exports to them. So if you'll notice here, the U.S. exports as a percentage of the total global exports, at one point we were roughly 50% of all exports to all countries in international trade. As international trade has grown, it's quadrupled over the same period. That has made it to where more countries are exporting more, which means the percentage of U.S. exports has shrunk. So now we only account for roughly 17, 18% of all global exports. Okay. So if you're part of the United States that exports something, you're now competing with a lot of countries that maybe have a comparative advantage over you to export those materials. Also, the percentage of wealth that the top 1% of households hold in the United States has increased dramatically in the global period. So people that are very, 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 very well off in society during the global period, they've become to hold even more of their own wealth. So if you look at percentage of the GDP that they've held in the early 1970s, it was roughly 10.5, 11%. Now the same 1% of people at the top income levels, they control 20% of the country's GDP. So they account for most or higher percentage of the wealth of the country. This is the opposite for people at the bottom 50%, those people that are lower on the income threshold in the United States. The percentage of wealth that they owned as for the country's wealth in the 1970s was 20% roughly of GDP. This has shrunk now to about 12.5%. So the earning and wealth of these groups of people has shrunk. The people at the top has expanded. This has increased what we would call inequality, and there are a couple of videos that will go over what's going on in this time frame. So these are just some basics overviews of globalization, some positives, some negatives. It's complicated, but basically just what it is and the pressures of it all.